Brielle stood on the balcony waiting for Francis, her husband, who did not return home from work since yesterday. Brielle and Francis started dating when they were in college. Unfortunately for Brielle, she got pregnant during her final year of college and had to drop out of school, leaving Francis alone to complete his final year. Brielle's parents then compelled Francis to immediately marry Brielle when he completed college, and he found no problem with that. A year later, Francis completed college and married Brielle, who had just given birth to Brianna, their daughter. Brielle's parents gave Brielle and Francis a huge amount of money and a company, so that the two would live a very comfortable life. Everything was going on for the couple until Francis changed completely. He started staying out late at night, going to nightclubs with different girls and sleeping out. Brielle kept wondering why her marriage was in shambles after just 3 years. Francis would always maltreat her to some extent. In spite of all this, Brielle never told this to anyone because she believed she would be able to revive her marriage. Her only problem was how sad she was seeing Brianna, her daughter, in tears whenever Francis maltreats her. Brielle would always comfort Brianna and put her to sleep. Because of Brielle's inability to complete college, she was a stay-at-home mom. She started to regret ever getting pregnant during her last year of college. It was their marriage anniversary, and Brielle decided to set up a candlelight dinner with Francis and use that opportunity to rekindle her marriage with him. She kept the dinner a surprise and waited that evening for Francis to return. She waited for hours, but Francis never came home. She kept calling him on phone, but he declined her calls. She felt down in her spirit. She decided to go over to the office where he worked. She left her daughter in the care of their housemaid, Auntie Emmy, who was also living with them. On reaching the building of the office, she parked the car and was about to step out when she saw Francis entering his car with another woman. Her heart started beating faster and she started shaking. Was her worst nightmare coming to pass? Was Francis really cheating on her? She decided to follow them. They ended up at a hotel. She started to cry. So many thoughts reigned in her mind, but all she could think of was how Brianna never deserved such a father. She saw Francis and the woman entering the hotel while hugging and cuddling. It was an eyesore for her. She waited for about 5 minutes and stepped out of the car and went to the hotel. She asked the receptionist about Francis, and the receptionist revealed to her that he used to come to the hotel very often with the woman. Brielle's heart sank. She felt a heavy burden on her shoulder. She immediately ran out of the hotel sobbing. Life was cruel and wicked to her. She got into her car and drove off. Brielle found herself at the park crying profusely. She was heartbroken. What could have went wrong in their marriage? She cried and fell asleep on the bench at the park. She felt a tap on her shoulder and woke up. "What are you doing here in the middle of the night?" a man asked. She immediately woke up and ran to her car and drove home. The next morning, she packed all her belongings and left the house together with Brianna. Brianna kept asking Brielle where her dad was and why they were leaving, but Brielle assured Brianna that everything was going to be fine. Brielle and her daughter went back to her parents' house. Brielle's mom, Mrs. Sheila, was shocked to see her daughter and her granddaughter. "What happened?" she shockingly asked. Brielle broke into tears and explained everything to her mom. Mrs. Sheila was so furious and vowed to punish Francis for what she had done to Brielle and Brianna. Mrs. Sheila then prepared rooms for Brielle and Brianna and cooked for them to eat. That afternoon, Francis returned home and came to see the house empty. "Where is everyone?" he asked. He went upstairs and realized Brielle had packed her things and left. He was so happy and knew he had gotten his freedom. He then realized what would happen if Brielle told her dad. He would lose all the money and company he gave to him when they got married. He then thought of a plan to turn things around. He then drove off to Brielle's parents' house and pretended to be sad. "Please come back, honey," he said to Brielle and fell on his knees. Brielle then told him how she followed him to the hotel and saw everything, but Francis denied. Mrs. Sheila then kicked Francis out of the house and promised to take back all the properties they had given to him. Everything that was going on took a big toll on Brielle. She decided to take Brianna to the park to play with her. When they got to the park, a man approached her saying, "Are you the lady who was sleeping on the bench?" She turned to look at the man. She was mesmerized by his looks. He looked so handsome and masculine. She kept staring into his eyes and he did same. "Hi, I'm Benjamin," he said, as he stretched his hands towards her. Brielle shook hands with him and he asked her why she was sleeping on the bench, but she ignored.
"Hello, are you my mom's friend?"
Brianna innocently asked. "I hope to be," Benjamin replied. Was this encounter going to be the beginning of a new love chapter for Brielle? While all these were happening, Francis was monitoring Brielle from afar. He was stalking her. When he saw Brielle talking to Benjamin, he got really furious. "How dare she find another guy?" he angrily said. He planned on getting rid of Brielle in order to maintain the properties. He sneakingly went over to where Brielle had parked her car and cut the wires to the brakes. He then left the park hoping for his plan to succeed. Brielle and Brianna were about to board the car when Benjamin rushed over to them, wanting to speak to Brielle. "I hope to see you again," he said. Brielle nodded him consent and they exchanged contacts. Just when Benjamin was about leaving, a car from nowhere hit Brielle's car, damaging the side of it. Luckily, Benjamin held Brielle and Brianna and pushed them out of the way, and none of them got hurt. "Are you okay?" he asked with care. They were all fine. Benjamin then offered to drop Brielle and Brianna home in his car, and they agreed. Francis's plan seemed to have failed. The next morning, Francis received divorce papers from Brielle's lawyers, which stated that after the divorce, Brielle would get back all the properties which were given to Francis when they got married. Francis was pissed. His plan failed. He vowed to destroy Brielle's life before she got the properties. He decided to come up with a new plan. Meanwhile, Benjamin and Brielle seemed to be spending time together and had gotten very closer over the past few weeks. It was obvious that the two had fallen in love with each other. Benjamin already knew of Brielle's marriage disaster and was eager to give her a life she deserved. Brielle became happier each day and her life problems seemed to lessen. She enrolled Brianna in school. Francis found out and planned to abduct Brianna. He went to her school and took her, claiming that her mom, Brielle, asked him to come for her. Brianna loved her dad, so she followed him. He took her to his car and drove to a secret hideout, far away from the city. Later that day, Brielle and Benjamin went to Brianna's school to pick her up. When they informed her that Francis had come for her, she panicked. She immediately called Francis and warned him not to harm Brianna, but he teased her and hung up. Brielle felt so depressed. Why was life treating her this way? She regretted the day she met Francis. Benjamin tried to console her, but he failed. Francis later called Brielle and told her to pay a huge sum of money in return for Brianna, and she agreed immediately. She went over to the bank and withdrew the money. Francis then texted her the location and warned Brielle not to come along with anyone, and she agreed. Benjamin knew he couldn't trust Francis, so he sneakily followed Brielle. Francis had planned to get rid of both Brielle and Brianna when she arrives and take the money and run to another city. He was indeed wicked. Brielle arrived at the location and called Francis to inform him. She was panicking. All she needed was her daughter to be okay. Francis instructed her to leave the money on the road and step away, and she did. She walked forward and saw an abandoned tent where Brianna was hidden. She immediately ran over and saw Brianna tied to a rope. Immediately, Brianna saw her mom. She started crying. Brielle went over and untied the rope and hugged her daughter. Both were in tears. Francis, on the other hand, saw that Brielle had fallen into his trap. He went over to pick the money and blocked the entrance to the tent and decided to set it on fire. He poured kerosene on the tent and lighted a match. "Have fun," he said, and threw the matchstick onto the tent, which immediately caught fire. Benjamin immediately arrived with the police and he was in total dismay. Francis ran quickly to his car, but the police stopped him. Benjamin, without hesitation, ran into the tent to save Brielle and Brianna. The fire got worse. The police called the fire department, but because the place was far from the city, the chances of them arriving early was 0. When Francis saw all 3 of them trapped in the tent, he was happy. He didn't care whether he went to prison. All he cared about was his plan succeeding. Miraculously, after some minutes, Brielle and Brianna found their way outside the tent. But it was too late for Benjamin, and he couldn't make it. Brianna, on the other hand, fainted due to the excess smoke she had inhaled. Brielle broke down in tears, sad, heartbroken, and depressed. She had lost the man she loved. She felt so helpless. Francis won. How cruel, how unfair, how heartbreaking.